Hello everyone and good evening. My name's Don Arleth and welcome to our main edition of World News Tonight here on TVP World. Tonight our main focus is back on Ukraine. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen paid a visit to Kyiv today, where she announced that the European Union will loan Ukraine 35 billion euro. We'll take a look at that and all the latest threads from Kyiv. That's still ahead, but first up, let's take a look at tonight's headlines. The Polish Prime Minister appoints a special government representative for flood recovery. Israeli aircraft have carried out the most intense attacks on southern Lebanon in almost a year of war. And Germany's far-right AfD party polls strongly before the Brandenburg state elections. Ukraine is preparing for a cold winter as Russia's offensive against Ukrainian energy infrastructure intensifies. To help the war-ravaged country with the upcoming challenges, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced 35 billion euros in loans as part of the EU's assistance package.
While it remains unknown how the winter will look this year, much points to the fact that the Ukrainian people should prepare to weather bitter cold, given Russia's incessant bombardment of Ukrainian energy facilities.
Russia has not stopped its terrorist attacks on our power plants and other critical civil infrastructure for a single day.
The situation is very dire, and the first bouts of winter are around the corner.
Between March and August of this year, the Russian Federation launched 9 large-scale, coordinated waves of attacks on Ukraine's electricity infrastructure. The Russian Federation officials publicly acknowledged that they had struck their designated targets.
Today, the EU executive body's president paid a visit to Kyiv, where she met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Ursula von der Leyen pledged to lend Ukraine 35 billion euros funded from seized Russian assets. She also reassured the Ukrainians that the EU won't abandon them.
The European Union is here to help you in this challenge, to keep the lights on, to keep your people warm as winter is just around the corner, and to keep your economy going as you fight for your survival.
In a bid to shore up this year's winter effort in Ukraine, von der Leyen yesterday announced a fresh aid package for the war-torn country, totaling 160 million euros.
This includes 60 million euros in humanitarian aid for shelters and heaters, for example. And it includes around 100 million euros for repair works and renewables. And these 100 million euros come from the proceeds of the immobilized Russian assets in the European Union.
And this help is sorely needed. Last year, power outages, blackouts and closures of icebound roads and tram connections affected a number of Ukrainians. Many of the war-stricken people were forced to seek shelter as their homes didn't provide them with warmth and safety. One of them was 63-year-old Lyubov Ganzela, who resettled in the basement after her apartment was shelled by the Russians.
I prepared myself beforehand as they said that there would be a full-scale invasion. I slowly carried everything down, the microwave, the slow cooker, all other stuff too.
Many struggled with basic necessities.
There is no hope for electricity. There's no gas, and the power comes and goes. It doesn't depend on people, it depends on the weather.
Ukraine's military effort will be crucial in the coming weeks. As of now, 2/3 of the power generation capacity of Ukraine was lost. With repairs, fewer power plant construction and increased exports, the EU aims to restore 75% of Ukraine's energy capabilities.
Emergency services across Poland are on high alert as the country continues to grapple with the catastrophic flooding. A special representative for flood recovery has been appointed by Prime Minister Donald Tusk. Here's more.
Polish President Andrzej Duda has visited the flood-stricken regions after facing criticism for his delayed response to the crisis. The president emphasized that rather than looking for someone to blame, the focus should be on helping the victims.
Today, the victims are awaiting much-needed help and support. They are expecting that we will all work together on improving the situation. That is why I am here today. The threat is now gone, and now we can focus on dealing with the challenges of returning to the victims a sense of normality. Today, I will introduce the Special Government Representative for Flood Recovery. This will be a huge task which is beyond the capabilities of individual ministries. It will need coordination on multiple levels of government.
Marcin Kierwiński from the Civic Coalition, the former head of the Interior Ministry, is expected to give up his seat at the European Parliament to take on the role. In the meantime, the Polish Red Cross and other charities and grassroots initiatives are hard at work delivering aid. Southeastern Poland is preparing for the upcoming flood wave.
We've been working non-stop for 4 days. We're supporting one another, and that's what's important.
People need help. I have friends here too.
We organize on social media, we know where we are needed, and we just go.
Experts warn that although the worst seems to have passed, the flood wave will continue to move through Poland for a few more days.
The city of Kłodzko in southwest Poland is cleaning up after the flood. According to eyewitnesses, water reached as high as 4 meters in parts of the city. The destruction is vast. On site is our reporter, Ovidiusz Nicheja. Good evening, Ovidiusz. So what are your impressions, your overall impressions after seeing this city there?
Well, it's a depressing post-apocalyptic site. After coming here, I took some pictures and sent them to my friends and family, and everyone told me, almost everyone told me, that this looks like the Ukrainian war zones, like the Donbass, and not like Poland. The destruction here is vast. In some places there's still thick mud and water. In other places there's this heavy dust in the air, piles of trash everywhere from the houses. Kłodzko is a beautiful city, located beautifully in the mountains. There are many beautiful buildings. We visited one such building, a villa which is 120 years old, and we saw the cleaning up efforts there. So let's take a listen to what the residents of that place told us.
The residents are unsure how long the cleanup process will take. It depends on the availability of equipment to dry the walls and remove moisture. While they no longer need food or drinking water, which has been available since yesterday, they are urgently seeking specialized equipment for drying the building.
Now we're just waiting for the dehumidifier and its effect to take hold, right? Absolutely nothing could be saved. Unfortunately, the flood took everything with it, so nothing can be reused. Absolutely nothing.
So the bottom line there is that water and food are no longer needed here. What's needed is specialized equipment which could help in drying up the flooded houses. But normality is returning to this city. Electricity is being restored in some of the buildings. There's running waters back in some of the buildings. And so the city definitely is returning to normality. We also saw some heartwarming images of people who have come here to distribute food and to help the people. So definitely in these difficult times, we can see many positive emotions also.
Yeah, it seems like it's time to pick up the pieces. Ovidiusz Nicheja reporting there from Kłodzko. Thank you very much. Poland is eligible to receive €5 billion from EU cohesion funds to deal with the aftermath of the recent floods. And more money could be on the way from the Solidarity Fund. The announcement has been met with some criticism from the conservative opposition in Poland. But is it really warranted? Here's more in this next report.
This is a very important moment.
Ursula von der Leyen announced Poland could expect some €5 billion from the cohesion policy during her visit to Wrocław on Thursday. Several prominent members of the conservative opposition, however, have since accused the EU of promising funds which Poland was already supposed to receive. One of these critics is the leader of the Law and Justice Party, Jarosław Kaczyński.
This is nothing else than reallocating the funds which we already have. I think politicians who boast that they can get anything done in the EU should worry about securing additional funds.
To find out what exactly is the cohesion policy, we spoke with Bartosz Zadura, the press officer of the European Commission's office in Warsaw. He told me it's a fund aimed at leveling the playing field in the EU.
European Union, it's supporting these European regions that need support because they are far or not very far, but below European average in terms of regional development, economic development, social development.
So, is it true that other projects which were supposed to use the cohesion policy funds will lose out because of the support for flood recovery? The Deputy Minister of Funds and Regional Policy, Jan Szyszko, disproves these claims.
No, that's nonsense. All the funds that will be reprogrammed are currently uncontracted. Hence, they will not touch other. Other projects.
Apart from the cohesion policy, Poland will also apply for donations from the EU Solidarity Fund. This process will take more time, as it requires the government to present a total cost of damages, and the flooding is not over yet. In the end, Poland can cover up to 6% of the total damages with EU assistance. Currently, the losses caused by the floods in southern Poland are estimated to be at least 1 billion zloty, or about 250 million euro. But the final number could be much, much higher. We have to wait until the floods are over. From Warsaw, TVP World, Kazimierz Łysiak.
Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski is meeting with a series of high-level officials in Washington, D.C. to discuss security issues. Analysts say Sikorski is likely to be pressing for Ukraine's case to use long-range weapons made in the United States on targets in Russia, ahead of meeting next week between President Biden and Volodymyr Zelensky.
It's just a week since Radosław Sikorski welcomed Secretary of State Antony Blinken to Warsaw. Poland's foreign minister pressed for the US to authorize long-range strikes that Kyiv says will help counter Russia's relentless air attacks on Ukraine. He's expected to meet with White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. Analysts say it's a message the Polish politician will deliver in person.
I think he will try to push forward the agenda that is kind of parallel to Ukrainian and US agenda. So he will be probably discussing the long-range missiles that can be used in Ukraine.
During his 10-day trip, Sikorski will also discuss security, strengthening transatlantic ties and investment opportunities.
So I think that those things might be also on the agenda, and I think about like atomic energy, for example, some infrastructure investments in Poland. That's probably a thing that Sikorski might also try to debate while being in US.
Volodymyr Zelensky will travel to the States next week, where he'll present Joe Biden with a victory plan for the war in his country. American officials say they're seeking more detailed information about how Kyiv would use long-range US weapons ahead of the meeting.
Now to the Middle East, where Israeli fighter jets conducted more than 50 airstrikes on Hezbollah targets in Lebanon today in one of the heaviest aerial attacks in the past year. The latest escalation comes only a day after the walkie-talkie blasts and 2 days after thousands of Hezbollah pagers exploded all over the country.
More than 100 Hezbollah missile launchers were destroyed in Thursday night's attacks, according to the Israel Defense Forces. On Friday, they also managed to take down a prominent Hezbollah commander, Ibrahim Akil. The Lebanese terrorist group responded with their own strikes on the Golan Heights, occupied by Israel. The latest exchange of hostilities has made the future of Lebanese citizens more uncertain than ever.
Whatever people say, whether they say there will be a war or there won't be a war, we are now living in war, and whatever happens, we are with them and not against them. We are the resistors defending Lebanon.
If fears of a bigger escalation in Lebanon were high before, they are through the roof at this stage. The international community is once again calling on Israel to de-escalate.
Ensuite, l'intégrité
The integrity, security and sovereignty of Lebanon must be preserved, and nothing, no regional adventure, no private interest, no loyalty to any cause whatsoever deserves to trigger a conflict in Lebanon.
Hezbollah terrorists have intensified their missile attacks against Israel ever since the outbreak of the war in Gaza on October 7th. Since Hamas in Gaza is much weaker now than at the start of the conflict, the Israel Defense Forces seem to be shifting their focus to the north. The latest exchange of fire comes only days after Israeli intelligence set off thousands of explosive devices, pagers and walkie-talkies across Lebanon. While the attack was aimed at Hezbollah operatives, it still gathered criticism, since at least 2 children were killed in the blasts.
And now to the UK, where earlier on Friday, British Foreign Secretary David Lammy chaired an urgent Cobra meeting discussing recent tensions between Israel and Lebanon. The government in London is looking closely at this situation to ensure that it's prepared in case of any further escalation. Our London correspondent Claudia Travinska has more on the meeting.
The Cobra meeting held on Friday morning had one goal in mind: to make sure in case of further escalation, the government is ready to evacuate Britons currently residing or visiting Lebanon. What is a Cobra meeting, you may ask? Well, it is a gathering of government ministers held at Whitehall in London, usually convened for the purpose of high-level coordination and decision-making during a crisis. The situation seems under control for now in terms of preparedness, as the British military had been put on standby over the summer just in case an emergency evacuation would have to be launched following a spike in tensions between Israel and Hezbollah. That included 2 ships already stationed in the region. Additional troops were also deployed to Cyprus to the Royal Air Force Base should an evacuation be required. Over the past few weeks, the level of readiness for a possible escalation was lowered as the tensions seemed to ease. However, that has now changed after recent Israeli strikes. British Foreign Secretary has previously called for a ceasefire between the 2 countries upon his recent visit to Paris.
I've just come from a meeting with my US, French, German and Italian counterpart. We of course discussed the situation in Lebanon, which is of huge concern at this time, and all of us are monitoring it very closely, and we are all very, very clear that we want to see a negotiated political settlement so that Israelis can return to their homes in northern Israel, and indeed Lebanese can return to their homes. And that's why tonight I'm calling for an immediate ceasefire from both sides so that we can get to that settlement, that political settlement that's required.
Regardless, a source close to the government in London said the meeting is just prudent planning to make sure the UK is ready in case of an emergency situation. From London for TVP World, I'm Claudia Czerwinska.
All eyes are on Brandenburg, the 3rd Eastern German state to hold elections this month. This comes 3 weeks after the far-right Alternative for Germany's historic victory in Thuringia. Recent polls predict another AfD victory. However, the ruling SPD party is hoping to convince voters to keep their trust with them.
The SDP has been in power in Brandenburg for more than 30 years. This time, however, the far-right AfD stands a real chance of victory, polling 3 percentage points ahead of the SDP. Far-left BSW, which got to double digits less than a year after its launch, is also chipping away at the SDP vote. Dietmar Woidke, who has been Minister President of Brandenburg for 11 years, is hoping to turn the tide.
I will do everything in my power so that the flag of Brandenburg remains free of fascist stains. It's our challenge and we will accept it. I am not only fully determined but also fully confident that we can make it.
Woidke promised to step down if his party fails to come first, a pledge much welcomed by the AfD.
He said that if he is not first, he'll resign as state premier. We won't hold him back. Let him do it. On September 22nd, Woidke as state premier will be history.
Both the AfD and BSW support reducing migration, watering down climate change policies, and stopping weapon deliveries to Ukraine. The populist parties are making a strong appeal to voter dissatisfaction with the high cost of living, as well as security concerns.
I think everybody who intends to vote for the AfD should have a closer look at their election program, because they would get very scared about what the party is actually planning to do.
I'm more undecided than ever, not because I don't like politics now, but because I simply don't like politicians anymore.
I think that AfD will probably come out on top, and that the other parties won't promote their program enough to really convince people. People here understand what is happening around them, but I think that there is just not enough trust in the other parties.
Just across Germany's southeastern border, Czechs are also due to cast their ballots this weekend to elect the 675 members of the country's 13 regional councils. The elections have not been cancelled despite many areas of the country being affected by the catastrophic flood brought by Storm Boris.
Securing further aid is our first priority, but no one has cancelled the elections, so we must prepare for them.
It will be ready. Nothing can be done, unfortunately.
The Czech elections are due to be held on Saturday and Sunday. The populist opposition party ANO is currently leading the polls and is expected to receive about a third of the vote.
And how will European leaders implement the major takeaways of Mario Draghi's report so that Europe can compete with the United States and China in terms of economic growth? We'll be exploring the answers to this question in our new show, On the Record, hosted by TVP World's Adam Yasser. Let's take a sneak peek of the program.
Well, the implementation of the, let's say, major points of the report is the matter of how determined we are to implement it. So
do you detect this determination across Europe to implement it?
We'll see. We just saw the report. I think we all see that there are problems like that. We see these problems on the member states level. We see it in Poland. We see it in every country, basically. We see challenges with implementing it. But I think if we are determined enough, and we should be, the question is when, maybe, but not if.
I think the EU does set the plan, but ultimately what I expect is that we will inevitably fail several times until we really get to the point that implementation is smooth. And so what I mean by that is I expect countries to resist the implementation. It will fuel discontent because ultimately Europeans want growth and want a better future. It will feed into a second wave of political response, and we'll carry on like this for 2 or 3 times at least before we really get going.
And you can tune in for On the Record with Adam Yasser just after World News Tonight at 8:30 p.m. Central European Time here on TVP World. So stay with us because it's coming up soon. And now, Ursula von der Leyen's 8th visit to Kyiv comes just before the heating season begins, at a time when Russia continues to focus its attacks on energy infrastructure. Peter Dickinson, editor-in-chief of Business Ukraine, now joins me to discuss this issue and more. Hello, sir, and thank you very much for joining us on World News Tonight.
Good evening.
Now, the heating season is just around the corner, and based on all the attacks on critical infrastructure, we've seen them for years now. How do you think that this is going to impact the people of Ukraine coming up this winter?
Well, there are very, very serious concerns about what the winter season will hold. We're already experiencing significant blackouts in much of the country. It tends to ebb and flow. At the moment where I am in Kyiv, power is fairly solid, fairly reliable. But just a few weeks ago, there were only a few hours power per day. Now, this, of course, we're still in September. The weather is still very good. As the temperature drops, and it will drop soon, demand for electricity will increase massively. It will double by many estimates. So the power system, which is already under huge strain, we will not be able to cope simply. So we're anticipating very widespread, extensive blackouts. that will have major implications for the Ukrainian economy, but also for the Ukrainian population. For people, for example, who are living in high-rise buildings, which is most residents in the major cities, many will not be able to leave their apartments. There'll be fears that they'll be stuck in lifts. They'll be plunged into darkness. There'll be no heating in many cases. Those living on higher floors won't have water. So there's a whole range of issues this will create. And the anticipation at the moment is that it will be a very, very difficult winter.
Right, and that obviously affects thermal heating plants as well. So like you mentioned, the high rises, people are simply going to be very cold this winter. And then you have to think about the water in the pipes, that once the apartments get below a certain temperature, then we have broken pipes everywhere, and that just exacerbates the problem. So what exactly assistance is Ukraine receiving at this moment from international partners to help try and weather the storm, if you will?
Well, there's a range of different elements of support. One, of course, is repairing the existing system, repairing damage that's been done, fixing existing power plants and power lines and the power structure, the power grid in general. Another string is the introduction of smaller scale power plants, boiler capacity, which is harder for Russia to hit. At the moment, we have Ukraine's energy system is very centralized, so it's relatively easy for Russia to hit a certain limited number of very centralized and very large power plants. So one of the things that we're seeing being done is the introduction of much smaller energy sources to hopefully deter or make it more difficult for Russia to attack. Work is also underway to increase imports from the European Union to expand capacity, to make it possible for Ukraine's neighbours, including Poland, to provide Ukraine with more electricity. So there's a number of steps being taken. Of course, the main step that everyone in Ukraine is hoping to see, and really the only thing that can really be fully effective, is to increase the country's air defences to prevent Russia from carrying out these strikes.
Yes, indeed. Now, if we look at neighbouring countries who have already provided a lot of aid to Ukraine, what do you think it is that perhaps people in Poland or beyond can provide for Ukraine to help remedy this situation a little bit, at least?
Well, as I say, the imports of electricity from neighbouring countries, from the EU states, Poland, Slovakia, from the Czech Republic, Romania, that is very helpful, and that is certainly something that Ukrainians are hoping will increase. For that to happen, the capacity, the ability to send more, it needs to be expanded. That is taking place. Of course, a lot of the power grids in neighbouring countries also have a lot of similarities with Ukraine's grid. They also date back to the Cold War era, the Soviet era. So there are also parts that can be provided. There some in the Baltic states. They've been actually dismantling old power stations and basically transporting them to Ukraine to use as spare parts, to cannibalize them essentially, to repair the damage being done to Ukraine's own power grid. So there's a range of measures that can be taken, and also right down to simply providing generators. If you walk around the Ukrainian cities today, you'll see small diesel-powered generators literally everywhere, outside every building, outside apartment blocks, outside restaurants, kiosks. Basically, people are looking to provide, looking for immediate responses and looking for solutions. And so the provision of generators on a very small scale up to large industrial generators is also a very important part of the international aid efforts.
And how does this all affect the supply chains in Ukraine? I'm saying the provisions of delivery of food to even the grocery stores which sell the food to the population. Just how much is that impacted by the current energy needs and lack of supply of electricity?
Well, so far, I mean, one of the key things we've seen throughout this war is the incredible adaptability and resilience of the Ukrainian people. That applies also to the energy situation. They have managed to find alternative sources for warehousing, storage facilities. Most major supermarkets now that you'll come across will have their own industrial-sized generators outside. But when you go inside, very often you'll see that certain segments, the dairy produce, for example, might be half empty. The shops themselves will be quite dimly lit. There are occasions where you can't use bank cards, or you can't use cashless payments. They're only cash because the banking system is down for a period. There are a lot of obstacles created by this, and that does impact on the day-to-day supplies around the country. But as yet, I would say that they're coping with that. They're managing to get around that. But of course, there are issues in relation to things that are especially perishable goods, like dairy produce, like fruit and veg.
Yes, indeed. Well, it's going to be a difficult winter, but we all know that Ukrainians are indeed very, very resilient. Peter Dickinson, Editor-in-Chief at Business Ukraine, thank you for joining me. And that concludes this edition of World News Tonight. Thank you all for joining me. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next time. Good night.